All right, welcome to another painting tutorial, and this one we're going to look at Wolverine from X-Men United. So the model here was spray painted with a gray primer and then a top-down zenithal highlight using another white primer. I used Tamiya white primer, but any sort of a white would do. The idea here is I'm going to use some transparent paints, some contrast, and some inks to help make this a bit faster paint job. So not doing some sort of pro paint job here, just trying to do something fast so they can get all the guys done and make them painted models to be used in the game. So using Liquitex yellow here to do a nice, very thin sort of coat over top of that zenithal highlight. Works really well on the light white areas. Some of the gray areas look a little bit greenish, so it's not ideal for that. Maybe a sepia undercoat would have been ideal for that, but this is not too bad. So it goes on really quick, and you want to make sure you put it on as thinly as possible just to get some coverage, but you also don't want any sort of pooling with this liquid ink sort of a paint. So now I tried to do some blue here, mixing on that, try to do a similar thing, trying to preserve some transparency, but really didn't turn out well, so I'm going to skip this and come back to this later. I'm going to use some basic Citadel base coats to do those blue areas and then highlight with some layers. Doing a contrast flesh tone around his mouth and his arms. Again, just using this as a base coat for all the fleshy areas, and I'll highlight those with some of the regular flesh tones later. I like using the contrast paints for base coats because it kind of combines the base coat and the wash all in one go, and then it saves you a bit of time later. But you have to be careful to paint within the lines, which sometimes I have a hard time doing. So that's one of the benefits of those base paints is that you can kind of paint outside the lines and touch it up with your next paint. So I'm putting some contrast paints on the black stripes here. I thought contrast might help me get that crisp line at the edge. It turns out it didn't so much, so just going with plain black paint would have been better there. So Chaos Black or something like that. Going on with the red base coat here for his belt. Again with the contrast paints to skip the shading later. And I'll highlight this up with some layer paints at the end. Some Null and Oil gloss here. Trying to use this to get some sharp lines. So the gloss washes are helpful for doing so panel lines or sharp lines. They don't sort of pool on the flat areas. So I thought this might help me get some of those transitions between the black and yellow a bit sharper. Trying another contrast paint for the blue, and it didn't turn out either. So again, I scrapped that plan and just go straight on with one of the base colors for blue. Just a standard blue kind of navy color is all we're going for here. So I'll fix that up after. On the base here, I just want to keep it simple, so I just did a gray wash or a gray contrast paint. I don't want to put any emphasis on the bases of these guys. I just want to keep them simple so it doesn't draw anything away from the model. So just a plain gray contrast there. Also doing that on the claws because I'm going to do them sort of a pseudo non-metallic metal. So gray wash helps that as a base coat, and then I'll just highlight up some grays. Trying to get some of the contrast lines between the transitions of colors. So using Agric Earthshade just around some of the edges there between the skin and the mask and around some of these highlights or these details on the back here. I find with models of this scale, where two colors meet each other, that's one of the critical areas to make things look decent. Just putting on the white contrast here for that smoky bit. Again, trying to make sure it just kind of looks decent, but not draw anything away from the model. So using the gray layer paint, blue layer paints here in kind of a glaze to highlight up this blue. So it's kind of a medium blue and trying to go up to a light blue on the edges there. And still trying to get that sort of directional highlight that you can do a bit better with models of a bigger scale like this. Going in with some of the grays to highlight up his claws here, and I'll do the same thing with his belt buckle, kind of highlighting the edges and making some high spots on them that'll kind of simulate the non-metallic metal look in a very kind of quick and dirty kind of way. Obviously, you can spend hours and hours doing proper non-metallic metal, but this is a way to kind of cheat at it. And it's doing some edge highlighting here with a nice bright gray to give that sort of impression of these sharp, shiny claws. Going back with a bit of yellow and white ink mixed together and trying to get some of these highlights on this yellow. I just found that some areas, especially his chest here, they didn't get that white primer on them as much. So this is a way to help bring that up. You can see the paint is fairly thin, or very thin, because it's, again, those inks. So I probably should have cleaned my brush off a little bit more. You can see I get a little bit of pooling, which I shouldn't be doing here. But it does help bring out some of the other areas that the spray primer didn't quite get. The white adds a little bit of opacity to the yellow. Okay, and then just doing a bit of brown on the skin here around those hairy bits on his arms, just to give it a bit of a different color. Probably should have used a different contrast, but that one's fine. Doing a bit of the skin highlights now. With the contrast and the way these the base coat went on, just trying to make it a bit more smooth looking, give a bit more color to things, really. Doing a light gray for his eyes and his teeth here, and I'll do a white highlight on that as well, but mostly it's just a light gray. Some more highlights on the skin. You can see I'm just trying to do things quickly now, finishing it off just so it looks decent for a tabletop sort of level of paint job here. And some final highlights on the black. So I just find that solid colors don't look great, so a little bit of a gray or dark gray there to help make that look a little bit better. And some final edge highlighting here on the blue mask and his gloves and his shoulder pads and all that. Again, just to give a bit more sharpness to it, a bit more richness to the colors by adding those layers. Doing a single highlight on the belt here. It's not very prominent in the model, so it doesn't need to spend a lot of time on that, but just looks a little bit better than that contrast base coat. And that's about it. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you'd like to see any other ones, please let me know and post a comment here or check out my blog. The link will be in the description below. Hope you enjoyed this. See you next time.